Hello, and welcome back to our third and what I believe is going to be our final part here in debunking the Mance Rayder is Arthur Dayne slash Corin Halfhand is Oswald Went slash Tormund Giantsbane is Gerald Hightower theory. The Gerald Hightower Tormund Giantsbane combination is interesting in this theory because it is both the most complex but also the easiest to deconstruct, in my opinion. So I guess we'll start from the beginning and then work our way deeper into the Tormund Giantsbane idea. Alright, let's get down to this age shit because it's about to get complicated. We're going to start with Gerald Hightower, and I will show you my insane calculations, and then we'll skip on to Tormund Giantsbane, and I will show you my insane calculations. According to the wiki, Gerald Hightower was born in or before 243 AC. However, we can safely determine that this was well before 243 AC because Barristan Selmy was born between 236 and 237 AC, and Gerald Hightower is already Lord Commander of the Kingsguard at this point, and he is the one who accepts Barristan Selmy into the White. But let's see if we can narrow it down a little further. So Lord Leighton Hightower, his nephew, is born in or around 236 to 240 AC, and his daughter, Illyri Hightower, is born between 257 and 264 AC. Mace Tyrell, her husband, is around the same age, being born between 256 AC and 263 AC. Their oldest son, Willis, was born between 273 and 276 AC, meaning the couple was between 13 and 16 when he was conceived and then born. So I think we can safely assume, given that and Ice and Fire standards, that Leighton Hightower was somewhere around the same age when he was having children, perhaps between 13 and 20, and since Gerald is Leighton's uncle, we can assume that Leighton's father is probably the older brother, and if his wife gave birth to Leighton between the ages of 13 and 20, this would fit very nicely into the pre-established Illyri timeline, and it would also match quite nicely with Ice and Fire standards. This would then place Leighton's father's birth between around 210 AC to 220 AC, which would place Gerald Hightower between around, let's say, 215 to 225 AC. This would put him in his mid-30s when he accepts Barristan Selmy into the Kingsguard, which makes sense because at that time he would be one of the older members of the Kingsguard, I'm guessing the oldest if he's inheriting the Lord Commandership. So assuming Gerald Hightower is born around the late end of the spectrum in 225 AC, he would be somewhere around 72 years old. I'm guessing a little bit older. I would say a bracket between 72 to 77 is reasonable to expect. And this means essentially we should expect him to be dead of old age, even if he had survived the Tower of Joy. And he certainly at this age would not be very combat capable. We know Tormund Giantsbane does fighting, and we know Barristan Selmy, who is around the age of 63 when the book starts, also fights. However, Barristan Selmy has noted that his fighting skill has gone downhill and he will very soon not be able to perform his duties as a knight. I'm guessing an additional 10 to 13 years would certainly diminish those skills, and it would definitely put most people out of the fight. Tormund Giantsbane certainly seems more spry than a man in his 70s, and we will see here in a minute that the Tormund Giantsbane timeline simply does not add up to a character within that age bracket. There is no listed date for Tormund Giantsbane's birth, so we actually don't have very much to go on when it comes to picking out when he was born. Thankfully, however, we do know a little bit about his kids, so we can kind of pin out a rough timeline of when they were born, which might help us indicate Tormund Giantsbane's age. Tormund Giantsbane's son Drin, or Dryan, I don't actually know how to pronounce that, was born in 290, making him 10 years old in 300. 300 being the year in which Stannis breaks the wildlings beneath the wall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Drin isn't actually Tormund's youngest son, that being Torwynd, who died in 300. I'm guessing he was between the ages of 5 and 7 when he died. We then have Munda, who we also have very little indication on an actual birth date of. However, she's stolen by Longspear Rick, which to me implies that she's old enough to be able to have children and to be the kind of person who would be getting married in wildling society, putting her, in my opinion, between 14 and 18. We then have two older boys who I actually do not know which one is the older and which one is the younger. Maybe someone can tell me that in the comments. We have Dormund, who dies beneath the wall in 300. And we have Toreg, also known as Toreg the Tall, who commands his father's rear guard and appears with his father to treat with Jon Snow. I'm guessing because these guys are both warriors, Dormund being the one who leads Tormund's spear lines, and Toreg being the one who leads his rear guard, they are probably between the ages of 20 and 35. I know that's kind of rough, but when you think about the age of most fighting men, that is basically the fighting age bracket for medieval warfare. So if we say the oldest of them is 25, we would come to an age bracket in which Tormund Giantsbane is as young as 40 and as old potentially as 65. I'm guessing he's somewhere in the middle of this, between 50 to 60. Even if we try to push the age timeline as hard as we can, we really can't get to a point where these guys would be around the same age. There's gonna be an age disparity between 10 and 15 years. Well, fuck you, random internet guy. Who cares about your numbers and ages and Wikipedias and all that bullshit? We have evidence that Gerald Hightower is actually Tormund Giantsbane. Alright, well let's dig into that evidence and see what we got going on here. In my opinion, the most interesting evidence that Tormund Giantsbane may not be who he claims to be is in the way he speaks. And I want to make it clear, I do find the way he speaks to be odd in several instances. The most prominent of these being the Maester's Ink one. It is very odd that Tormund Giantsbane knows what Maester's Ink is, and I cannot really think up a good explanation for this one. However, I will say there's two big roadblocks, this evidence being proof of him being Gerald Hightower. One is the consistent author error that appears throughout our books. And two, Maester's Ink is only implication of knowledge of things beyond the wall. It does not actually imply someone is from Old Town or even from the southern part of Westeros. Technically speaking, Tormund Giantsbane could even have been exposed to Maester's Ink at the wall or beyond the wall. There are, in fact, Maesters at the wall, so while it's weird that he knows what it is, it's not wholly outside the realm of possibility. Again, it's weird, and I would personally chalk it up to author error, but it certainly cannot be counted as evidence that he is Gerald Hightower. So unless we can find something more definitive to link them, we have to set this aside for right now. It has also been pointed out that Tormund Giantsbane's speech seems somewhat inconsistent. Now, I never really found his speech patterns to be strange, but we're going to take a look at one of the passages here and see what we think. I'm going to read it all non-tonal, and then I'll read it with some inflection. Come and take him then, but best come with sword in hand, for that's where you'll find mine. Might be I'll boil your bones and use your skull to piss in. Har. Alright, now let's read it with a little inflection. Come and take him then, but best come with sword in hand, for that's where you'll find mine. Might be I'll boil your bones and use your skull to piss in. Har! So, yeah, I mean, the har might be considered a little gratuitous, maybe George R. R. Martin could have thought up something better there, but to me that sentence doesn't seem wholly ridiculous, and I think if you read it with a slightly different inflection, you're not going to pick up the whole idea that's being put forth that he's somehow switching between being proper and being a pirate or something. So something else that is brought up about Tormund is the fact that he takes a liking to Jon right away. Now, why would he take a liking to him if Jon isn't somehow important to him? I would have two responses to that. One, Jon is actually a semi-important character, and if Tormund is trying to cozy up to him, it might just be because Tormund feels like he's schmoozing with someone important, or he might be intentionally doing it because he was told to. Who knows? Also, Tormund Giantsbane might just be interested in the Bastard of Winterfell. The fact that he's the Bastard of Winterfell is kind of interesting in and of itself, and Mance has taken an interest in him, which, once again, if we think about it, is most likely because Jon is the Bastard of Winterfell, making him strategically important. He's exactly the kind of guy that Mance and his followers would want to be friends with. The second thing I would say to this is that Jon is a main character. We kind of need these people to talk to him and become interested in him in order for the plot to progress. Characters just need to bond with certain characters, and there isn't always enough time to make it happen over like a year or more. Another major problem with Tormund Giantsbane being Gerald Hightower is unless he prescribed to a much longer version of the theory, there really isn't any good explanation for why or how he would be having all these children. I mean, seriously, how could the man possibly father all these children in the wilds? Gerald Hightower was able to watch 2 Starks get burned alive without leaving the side of his king. I hardly think that he is breaking his vows to go beyond the wall and father children. Now, at this point, I would start trying to list other evidence for Tormund Giantsbane being Gerald Hightower. However, I couldn't really seem to find any. Most of the idea that Tormund Giantsbane is Gerald Hightower comes from the idea that Mance Rayder is Arthur Dayne. Tormund has seemingly been pegged as Gerald Hightower because there needs to be a third figure in the north if we're going to have 2 figures of the Kingsguard survive the Tower of Joy. It seems as though he's almost just an afterthought in this theory, at least before the expanded version begins. So something tangential that I think is interesting here is that within this theory, Qhorin Halfhand's shaved face is used to indicate that he may have been a member of Varys' Kingsguard because the men of Varys' Kingsguard in that era had their faces shaved. However, Tormund Giantsbane's white beard is given as evidence that he might be a member of the Kingsguard. This is a great example of things that are kind of inconsistent about this theory. Alright, so we've blown this theory up over 3 different parts now. So I think we've officially dissected it and we can call it a day. But before we do, I'd like to say 2 things. I think the most important part of this theory is the ages. The ages really work to dispel the idea that Mance Rayder could be Arthur Dayne, Qhorin Halfhand could be Oswald Went, and Gerald Hightower could be Tormund Giantsbane. But why does it matter? Well, I guess it doesn't really. However, I think these characters are kind of getting done a disservice. These are really interesting, cool guys. The Half-Hand is somebody we know hardly anything about, but he's like some ridiculous badass who got his hand chopped off. And he's got some kind of interesting scheme going on with Jon. Tormund Giantsbane is this jolly, weird, wildling would-be king who's like way too friendly and loves chickens. But we find out he has a little bit more going on for him than that. He's also a pretty cool leader. And then we got Mance Rayder, Bale the Bard come to life, who's snooping beyond the wall and controlling the wildlings in an attempt to bring everyone south because he's fighting the True Winter and the others. I think these characters are all pretty badass, and having to turn them into other characters is kind of fun, I guess, but it totally destroys the fun, interesting stuff that already exists about them. I guess that's my opinion, so take away what you will, but I hope you enjoyed the series as we pulled these theories apart and got a closer look at them. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.